There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean of Sean Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel and another book haul. We've got another 6 books, most of which I'm very interested in. The first one, I'm going to need to be convinced. Let's see. Yeah, there's a note in here. This is a novel by Michael Ondaatje, The Cat's Table. I think I was familiar with the title, but I have had bad luck with Ondaatje. I can't even remember if I read The English Patient. I know I enjoyed the movie and remember that he said publicly that it was much better than his novel. And then I tried one, was it Anil's Ghost maybe that... No, in fact it was Divisadero. Had such an awful sentence on page 30 that I put the book down. I think he's one of Canada's most overrated writers, but I should keep an open mind. This is a gift from Lindy, and she writes... The protagonist/author is a child, but it's told from an adult's point of view looking back. I predict you will love it. Well, Lindy is often right about these things, not always, and I don't have a huge problem with child narrators if they're done well. This is set in the 1950s in Ceylon, which Sri Lanka was known as then, and that's all I need to know about that. When was this published? For some reason, the title is not stuck in my brain the way so many of his other books are. 2012. I've gotten into the habit of sharing epigraphs as well as opening passages from my books in my book hauls these days. So here is the epigraph from Joseph Conrad's Youth. And this is how I see the East. I see it always from a small boat. Not a light, not a stir, not a sound. We conversed in low whispers, as if afraid to wake up the land. It is all in that moment when I opened my young eyes on it. I came upon it from a tussle with the sea. That last sentence is quite striking. Opening paragraph. He wasn't talking. He was looking from the window of the car all the way. 2 adults in the front seat spoke quietly under their breath. He could have listened if he wanted to, but he didn't. For a while, at the section of the road where the river sometimes flooded, he could hear the spray of water at the wheels. They entered the fort, and the car slipped silently past the post office building and the clock tower. At this hour of the night, there was barely any traffic in Colombo. They drove out along Reclamation Road, past St. Anthony's Church, and after that he saw the last of the food stalls, each lit with a single bulb. Then they entered a vast open space that was the harbor, with only a string of lights in the distance along the pier. He got out and stood by the warmth of the car. This novel was kind of a cover buy for me. I had never heard of the book or the author, and I can't remember how I heard about it, but I ordered it. It's a debut novel from Scotland. It's called After Nora by Penelope Curtis. That's a gorgeous cover. It came from Blackwell's with its own little bookmark, which is also gorgeous. So this is my version of getting seduced by a cover, because it's not just the cover, but the kind of vibe of this. I hadn't heard of her. I'm really interested in Scottish lit, and it just sounds marvelous. Set in the 1920s in England. Oh, I guess there's 2 timelines. And this seems rather autofictional. I'm going to say more about what's on the back than I usually do. So in the 1920s, the titular character, Nora, her life is in a state of flux. She wants to be a painter. She wants to save her marriage. That's enough about that timeline. And then in the late 1960s, in Glasgow, a young biologist, Maria de Souza, wrestles with her feelings for an older colleague named Adam Curtis, the author's father. The connection between these two, the young biologist, the older colleague, who is the author's father, is unclear and impels the narrative 50 years later to seek out answers in Lisbon. What really happened between Adam and Maria? The story moves between 3 generations: London, Paris, Southern England, Scotland, Jamaica, and Portugal. So, it's a novel, there's some autobiographical stuff in it, and I'm as intrigued as all get out. The publisher also, Les Fugitives. I don't know how you pronounce that in French. It's a London publisher, but they're using a French name. Les Fugitives is new to me as well, but they sure put out gorgeous books. And the book is dedicated to 2 women who died too soon, Nora Curtis and Maria de Souza. I'm intrigued. Oh, well, in fact, because I'm so curious, I'm going to also read this. This book tells 2 separate but related stories. Part 2 recreates the story of Adam Curtis, my father, and his relationship with Maria de Sousa, whom he met when I was a child. Part 1 concerns his mother Nora, whom I never knew, but whose paintings I grew up with. All right, well, autobiographical fiction, for sure. Here is the opening paragraph of Chapter 1. And there's a heading, or a title, a heading anyway, called Two Herberts. At the close of the year 1925, Nora Kundal and her husband made their way to the Chelsea Arts Club ball. For weeks, Nora had encouraged her husband to accept the tickets his brother Charles had offered, and although he worried the place might be too noisy and that it might be difficult to get home, in the end he gave in. Nora and Herbert had met at the very same ball in 1919. The theme then was Dazzle, which, picking up on the camouflage painted by artists for the armed forces during the Great War, was perfectly pitched to celebrate the end of hostilities, if not the return to normality. Charles Kundal had had a spare ticket and a brother. Nora Stevens needed a partner. What began as a convenient arrangement between two fellow artists took on a more permanent status when, not long after, Herbert Kundal proposed to Nora. Somewhat taken aback, not least because she had blamed herself for not thinking of how ill-suited the evening's entertainment would be to a conscientious objector, she nonetheless heard herself saying yes to his second proposal. And here is an Irish novel. It's called Gráinne, and I didn't look up the pronunciation of the author's name. I think it's probably Gráinne, but I will paste in a correct pronunciation if I'm wrong. Better late than never. I have done the pronunciation research, and that is completely and utterly wrong. The correct pronunciation is Gráinne. Gráinne Murphy. This is a 2024 release, and it's set, or at least part of it is set. Yeah, two timelines. A group of friends, Helen, Annie, and Laura. We meet them as teenagers, and then 25 years later, a snowstorm forces them to spend time together. And I believe that 25 years later is during the pandemic. The epigraph is from, I think, a poem called What the Frog Taught Me About Love, from the collection Towards a General Theory of Love by Claire Shaw in 2022. Goose says, just be born to it. Dog says, roll yourself in it. Be governed by fear of loss of it. Cat says, you can always leave. Bowerbird says, go to great lengths for it. Penguin walks hundreds of miles for it. Firefly burns very bright for it. Frog just holds on tight. I love that. Opening through paragraphs, the third paragraph is just one very short sentence. The chapter is entitled Time Rather Than Space. A whisker over 14 hours, 2 in the air and 12 in her head, and Helen was at the narrower side gate, looking at the house through the iron bars, like a Dickens orphan. Same view of the drive. Same gravel underfoot. Same code for the gate. As if she had never left. As if the trains and planes and taxis had conspired to move her through time rather than space. Her hand on the gate told her that time had passed. She extended her fingers to their fullest and watched the flesh pucker and gather. Her skin cross-hatched like tweed. Her nails with their little half-moons that, despite frequent manicures, always looked like they were struggling. She had watched the moon rise one night, and sure enough, its own edges were ragged. No crisp lemon rind distinction, but a trailing off of pale into dark. She liked it more after that, ragged as it was, determinedly hanging in the sky above her. Who hung the moon? Wasn't that a song or a poem? A story? Something. Hello, Annie, she would say. Well, that is quite stunning prose. Oh, my goodness. Next is a book that was on my most anticipated releases for 2024, and so I've got it here. And it is by a Croatian writer. Sons, Daughters by Ivana Bodrožić, I believe is the correct pronunciation. Wrong again. After doing some research, this is as close as I can get to the correct pronunciation. Ivana Bodrožić. Translated from the Croatian by Elias-Bursać. And this has a transgender theme, I remember. That's why I put it on my list. I believe the protagonist, Lucija, she opens her eyes after maybe a coma, but she's paralyzed, incapable of speaking. Her memory's fine, so she's kind of coming to terms with her past, including a relationship with a lover who I think had gender dysphoria. Would be some trans-related issues in that relationship. So not as central as I had thought, but I am intrigued. I'll read the first full page, except the sentence that continues on to the next page I will not read. My darling mother. Most of all, I'd love to snuggle up with her and tell her everything. Now I can't anymore. Most of the day my eyes are trained on the ceiling. Covered in tiny imperfections, it is spacious. Shadow retreats across it in the morning, and then the sunlight lets loose a whiteness as if a thick, dark curtain has been drawn back to reveal a stage on which another endless day will play out. Around noon, when the blaze of midday begins, the ceiling is hard and impermeable. Something is dripping warmly across my face from the corners of my eyes. The doctors say it is not tears, just the bodily fluid that moistens the cornea. Then I have to squint, some, because the whiteness starts to fragment and scatter before me, piercing and drilling holes in my irises until I can no longer see. There are times when I doze off. My cycles of waking and sleeping are there just as they are for normal people. And though I know nothing will have changed, when I wake, I run my dry gaze across the ceiling, gradually and steadily ingesting meter by square meter. I start above the head of the bed, and then swim slowly toward the other side as far as I'm allowed. Sometimes there's a fly, plump, frisky, and loud, with rapid silken wings, and nuzzling tacky legs. It's poised up there, and stares down at all 1,000 of me. Well, I find that writing quite striking. The last two in this book haul are also gifts from Lindy. When she moved, she sent me a box of books. And this is a Jane Rule novel. Jane Rule was one of my favorite writers. I'm looking forward to reading more of her in the current to see if she still is. She was an American-Canadian lesbian novelist, and this is one of her big fat novels, Contract with the World. This is actually was Lindy's better half, Laurie's book, but I think she probably asked Laurie for permission to give it to me. And I can't remember if I've read this. It's 1980. Let's see. No, I'm sure I haven't. Oh, well, here's the note from Lindy. Laurie was ready to part with a lot of her old lesbian novels. So, thank you, both of yous. There's 3 friends in Vancouver in the mid-70s. Probably a whole bunch of them are lesbians, and I don't need to know another darn thing. Opening 2 paragraphs. Joseph Rabinovitz was puzzled about going crazy. Describing his symptoms to a doctor who disapproved of psychiatry, Joseph was advised to walk 10 miles a day to prevent manic breakdown. Since he lived less than a mile from the school where he taught industrial arts, commuting on foot did not complete the requirement. So Joseph set out at 6 in the morning and walked until 8:30, when it was time to arrive at school and set up his classes for the day. His walking was lonely at first, except for the mute acknowledgement of joggers, nearly all male and nearly all at least 10 years older than Joseph, who was 25. Bellies pregnant with middle age in their Adidas running suits, blue, red, or manly green, shoes to match. That Joseph could attempt to maintain his sanity in his ordinary clothes was a relief to him, and he was careful to make no particular road a habit, so that only very near where he lived did he have the embarrassment of sharing the embarrassment with a familiar heart patient or health freak. Well, I've always enjoyed Jane Rule's writing, and I sure enjoyed that. This is a nonfiction book by a Inuk writer who is uncomfortably living in Canada, Dr. Norma Dunning, and it is called Kinauvit, What's Your Name? And the subtitle, The Eskimo Disc System and a Daughter's Search for Her Grandmother. Lindy's note here is really quite interesting. She says, Dunning's writing isn't always strong, but her topic is fascinating. I've heard so much about this book, I really want to read it. I didn't enjoy her short story collection, Tainna, was a bail for me, despite it winning the Governor General's Award that year. But this nonfiction story is going to make my blood boil. What I already know about it makes my blood boil. Canada, in its racist, colonialist, assholish wisdom, imposed a system on what they called the Eskimos, which of course is now Inuit, Inuk, and probably other current names that aren't in my head. But the Canada, the fucked up country that I live in, had this is Eskimo Identification Canada system. From what I remember, it's not explained very well on the inside flap, but the indigenous peoples who were called inaccurately Eskimos, they were assigned a disc number so that their names were not used by the government in tracking them and controlling them and fucking them over. And this book is about that from a very personal, I think almost like a memoir, but also a historical exploration of what that was all like. So I don't care how poorly it's written, I want to know a whole bunch more about it. I'll read the first page in a bit. Chapter 1 is called Ilagit. Ilagit, which means family. Mom, what are we? I remember that Saturday afternoon when I walked into the kitchen of our military base duplex. It was the kind of Saturday that only the prairies can give. Not one bit of a breeze anywhere. The heat penetrating my 8-year-old body, making me feel like I was a human magnifying glass. I was so loaded with the swelter of summer that I could have burned footprints into the well-worn path between the playground and my home. The aroma of cooking oil was singing against the kitchen walls, while the deep fryer bubbled a happy tune on the counter. Deep fryers can trigger the hunger inside all of us. Mum had her back to me and was peeling potatoes. She was making home fries, a Saturday supper favorite. I asked my question a second time, and my mum spun around with a paring knife in one hand and a potato balanced in the palm of her other hand. She bent toward me and asked, "Who wants to know?" I felt like I had said a bad word. I had said the wrong thing. I had done something that I would have to take into the church confessional tomorrow. She repeated her question one more time. "Who wants to know?" Well, I'm hooked already. That's my book haul. What do you think? Thanks for watching.